In the early hours of July 16, 2010, in the usually quiet town of Pico Truncado, a shocking event occurred. The body of Johanna Casas, a 20-year-old model and former beauty queen of the town, was found in a deserted area. She had been killed by 2 gunshot wounds. The prime suspects in the murder were Marcos Diaz, her partner until the day of the murder, and Victor Cingolani, her ex-boyfriend. But the story would soon take an even darker turn. Johanna Casas was born in Pico Truncado, a small town in the northern part of Santa Cruz province in Argentina. The town got its name from a nearby hill with a flat top. From there, you can see the oil wells, which are the main industry in the area. Though her exact birth date isn't officially recorded, family social media posts and news reports suggest she was born on July 19, 1990. Johanna wasn't the only baby to arrive that day. 15 minutes after she was born, her twin sister Edith was born. They are the oldest daughters of Marcelina del Carmen Orellana and Valentin Casas, who also had another child. Valentin, a police officer, eventually split from Marcelina, but he stayed very involved in his kids' lives. The twins looked incredibly alike. They had the same face, build, and even sounded similar. They even shared part of their names, as their parents named the younger twin Edith Johanna. They were so similar that their mom would sometimes mix them up, even changing the same baby's diaper twice. The sisters shared a special twin bond. Edith once said that they could feel when something was happening to the other. For instance, when Edith was 11, she had an accident while with her mom in another city nearby. She was in a coma for a few days, and when she woke up, she kept asking for Johanna. Valentin told her that Johanna, who was with him back in their hometown, felt like Edith was calling her. As they grew up, the twins became beautiful young women with very different personalities. Edith was quieter and more reserved, while Johanna was outgoing and liked fashion and makeup. This interest in fashion led Johanna to start a modeling career. She even participated in fashion shows and traveled to bigger cities like Bahia Blanca, where she was once crowned the beauty queen of Pico Truncado. In mid-2006, when Johanna was just 15, she met a local young man named Victor Cingolani, who was 21 at the time. They met one afternoon at the town bingo hall, where Johanna was with her dad and brother. Victor was at another table with his mom and a friend. Later, he mentioned noticing Johanna looking his way quite a bit. Victor had a reputation around town for being quite the charmer and a ladies' man. He worked long hours at the oil company and spent his free time out with friends, often choosing local brothels over bars. He boasted about being with over 40 women who came to him effortlessly. That day at the bingo, after they exchanged looks, Victor felt sure he could start something with her. He said that Johanna made the first move by coming over and giving him a note with her name and phone number on it. He texted her right away and they started talking. They went out a few times and soon made their relationship official. Marcelina, despite the age difference between Johanna and Victor, was okay with their relationship. She preferred this to her daughter randomly hanging out with others. They were together for about 1.5 years. Over time, Johanna's parents noticed Victor's aggressive behavior toward her. There was an incident where Victor, trying to hit Johanna, accidentally broke a window and injured his hand instead. Things got even more complicated when Victor and Johanna broke up, and he started seeing Edith. Victor said his feelings for her grew over time, and he was never romantically involved with both sisters simultaneously. While he was with Johanna, Edith was dating another guy, and sometimes the four of them went out together. There were also times when Victor asked Johanna out, and Edith joined because she was home alone. Victor was drawn to Edith's quieter, more reserved nature. She was just as lovely as her sister, but simpler. Even after his relationship with Johanna ended, he kept in touch with Edith. Eventually, they admitted their feelings for each other, but Edith wanted to talk to Johanna about it first. Johanna told her sister they were adults and knew what they were doing, so she didn't oppose their relationship. However, the twins' close bond changed. When Edith started dating Victor, the friends they shared began to drift apart and each sister formed her own group. Victor and Edith eventually broke up, and Victor moved on to another local woman. Both sisters continued to have complicated relationships after Victor. When Victor ended another relationship 2 years later, he reached out to Johanna again. She was with someone else at the time, but quickly ended that relationship to get back with Victor. This reunion was brief, ending after 2 months because Johanna wanted children, which Victor did not. Afterward, Johanna started seeing a man named Marcos Diaz, who was disliked by her parents. The Diaz family was surrounded by rumors, including a serious allegation that one of Marcos's brothers had killed his own child. Marcos had a violent reputation and was possessive and controlling. He was overly jealous, constantly messaging Johanna and not allowing her to go out alone. Despite these red flags, they moved in together after just 6 months of dating. During this period, Victor rekindled his relationship with Edith, admitting he had never gotten over their breakup. This back and forth between the sisters would culminate in a series of dramatic, tragic, and scandalous events. On July 15, 2010, 4 days before their 19th birthday, Johanna went out partying with Marcos until about 3 in the morning. She was last seen alive as they left the party venue together. Early the next morning, a local dog walker discovered Johanna's lifeless body in an open field about 3 miles from the town center. The area, known as the forest belt of Pico Truncado, soon became the focus of intense police activity as news spread that one of the Casas twins had died. The autopsy later revealed that Johanna had been shot at close range in the heart and between the second and third ribs. Within hours of the discovery, police arrested Victor and Marcos as the main suspects in the crime, given their relationships with the victim. Investigators suspected that the murder was a planned act by both men, theorizing that Johanna wanted to end her relationship with Marcos, and the men decided that if she would not be with them, then she would not be with anyone. Marcos was released a week later due to a lack of evidence, despite having been the last person seen with Johanna the night before. Shortly after, authorities found DNA on a cigarette butt at the scene where Johanna was killed. Unfortunately, by that time, Marcos had fled and it would be over 6 months before he was captured and subsequently placed in pre-trial detention. Meanwhile, Victor remained in custody, charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend. However, he consistently maintained his innocence. According to his statements on the morning of July 16th, he had been at the casino and then at a friend's house until 6 a.m. Surprisingly, his arrest and subsequent charges did not completely sever his relationship with Edith. Victor later recounted that on his first night in prison, he asked for a phone to call Edith and tell her he had nothing to do with her sister's death. He also wanted to express his longing to see her again. However, Edith hung up as soon as she recognized his voice, then changed her number, and he was unable to contact her again. Victor, trying to see Edith again, asked to be taken to the hospital claiming he had a headache. On the way, he saw Edith walking hand in hand with another man, suggesting their intense relationship had ended. Edith later shared that she was going through a tough time. She was mourning her twin, the closest person to her, and dealing with her own inner turmoil. She felt ignored and over-medicated. 2 years after Johanna's death, in mid-2012, Victor stood trial for her murder, facing charges that painted him as abusive and controlling. The prosecution's case was built on 3 main pieces of evidence. The first was the paraffin test, done on Victor's hands right after his arrest, which detected gunpowder. The second was evidence from tracking dogs that placed him at the crime scene. Lastly, Victor's alibi failed as he couldn't confirm his whereabouts during the crime. Victor's lawyer pushed back, asking the higher court to throw out the evidence due to severe investigative errors, including a supposed audio recording of the judge of the case acknowledging mistakes by the inexperienced local police. Despite these challenges, the trial began on June 18, 2012. The prosecutor sought a 20-year sentence due to the alleged use of a firearm, while another suggested 15 years, and Victor's defense argued for his complete acquittal. Victor decided not to testify. The courtroom heard from various witnesses. Johanna's father accused Victor of past violent behaviors and threats towards his daughter, recounting a time he overheard Victor on a speakerphone call threatening Johanna. A woman who lived near the crime scene mentioned her son was the only one home that night and noted the delayed police response. The person who found Johanna testified that he saw no blood at the scene. Another witness spoke about Victor's complicated relationships with the twins, suggesting he saw Edith as a substitute for Johanna. Edith herself took the stand, having attended every day of the trial wearing a t-shirt demanding justice for her sister. She testified that Victor was physically abusive towards both her and Johanna, and claimed that he had coerced them into intimate relations. Finally, she stated that she believed Victor had played a role in Johanna's death, calling him a psychopath. The hearings concluded, and on June 27, 2012, Victor was sentenced to 13 years in prison for simple homicide. However, the controversy surrounding the case was far from over. Despite his conviction for Johanna's murder and the serious allegations against him, Edith later shocked everyone by announcing that she was back in a relationship with Victor. It remained unclear how this reconciled relationship came about, but at some point, Edith became convinced of Victor's innocence and believed that the real perpetrator of the crime against her twin sister was Marcos, who was in pre-trial detention awaiting his trial. When asked about her sworn testimony, Edith claimed she had been pressured by her parents to make those accusations. Regarding the evidence presented by the prosecution, Edith sided with the defense. Just as Victor's lawyer had argued during the trial, there was never any conclusive evidence placing Victor at the crime scene. He also highlighted issues with the paraffin test, noting that it was conducted without expert witnesses present, and the officer in charge didn't wear gloves and used his teeth to cut the tape. Furthermore, Victor was found to have the highest concentration of gunpowder on his right hand. He explained this by saying he had been in his brother-in-law's truck, who often went hunting and sometimes left bullets on the seats. Regarding the tracking dogs, the defense stated that 2 of them had yielded negative results, with only 1 dog indicating a positive result, and there were no witnesses to corroborate this. They also argued that a person's scent could linger at a scene for up to a month. Victor claimed the entire trial was rigged, suggesting that in Santa Cruz, anyone could be convicted just to satisfy the victim's family's demands. While in prison, Victor took up carpentry, stating that Johanna's death had transformed him, leading him to abandon his partying and drinking habits. Meanwhile, Edith had moved in with Claudia, Victor's sister, possibly due to estrangement from her own family when she decided to reconcile with the man convicted of her twins' murder. Together, they sold chairs, stools, tables, magazine racks, portraits, and paintings that Victor made in prison. With the proceeds, he bought a pair of rings. During a prison visit, Victor proposed to Edith, and she accepted. As expected, Edith's engagement to the man imprisoned for killing her sister was devastating news for the twins' parents, who could not comprehend what was happening. For them, Victor had murdered one daughter and was destroying the other. At that point, Marcelina declared that it was as if Edith had also died. Since moving in with her sister-in-law, Edith had barely seen her family. She believed they had brainwashed her daughter and that Claudia never left her alone for a second. When the engagement was announced, Edith's family filed a legal injunction to try to prevent the marriage, claiming that the 23-year-old was mentally unstable and fearing for her safety. The wedding was originally scheduled for December 5, 2012, when Victor had only served about 6 months of his sentence. However, the injunction delayed the ceremony. Despite this, Edith showed no signs of psychological or mental dysfunction that would prevent her from getting married. On February 14, 2013, Victor and Edith tied the knot amid widespread disapproval. Their story, a woman marrying the man accused of murdering her twin sister, grabbed headlines worldwide. An Argentine journalist known for his bold reporting style won the exclusive coverage with a bid of $1,500. Journalists from countries like Germany and the USA flocked to their small town, and big media outlets like the BBC and Daily Mail covered the story. Edith even got offers from Playboy magazine and was invited to join Argentina's top TV show, Dancing for a Dream, but she turned them all down. On their wedding day, just before noon, the couple headed to the civil registry office in Pico Truncado, heavily guarded due to the controversy. Chaos broke out when Victor, still incarcerated, arrived in a prison transport. The crowd became unruly, throwing punches, stones, eggs, and tomatoes, and shouting insults. The vehicle and the registry's doors were damaged, making the wedding front-page news. Despite the chaos, Edith and Victor declared their love and plans to start a family. Yet, the legal battle over Johanna Casas's murder was far from over. On June 4, 2013, the trial began for Marcos Diaz, who had been held at the Pico Truncado police station. Charged initially as an accessory, Marcos was described in court documents as violent and controlling, known for harassing his girlfriends and often involved in armed fights. His unexplained trip the day after Johanna's murder was seen as an escape attempt, and he stopped texting Johanna right after her supposed time of death, suggesting he knew she was gone. This contrasted sharply with his frequent texts to her the day before. DNA from a cigarette butt and a music CD linked to Marcos found near Johanna's body were key pieces of evidence against him. During the trial, Edith, supporting Victor, tearfully accused Marcos of killing her sister. Valentin, the twins' father, also testified, recalling the last time he saw Johanna with Marcos and describing Marcos as a dangerous man involved in cult-like activities, often seen causing trouble at the cemetery. Marcelina, for her part, described the accused as obsessive over her daughter. He never let her be alone, not even to attend family parties. However, the proceedings took an unexpected turn when prosecutor expanded the accusations. He posited that Marcos was the actual perpetrator of Johanna's murder and the only one present at the scene when her life was taken. As a result, on July 2, 2013, the court sentenced Marcos Diaz to 12 years in prison for the homicide of Johanna. At this point, 2 individuals were convicted for the same crime, each found guilty by different courts. Following the verdict, Marcos expressed dissatisfaction with the sentence, reasserted his innocence, and claimed he was convicted because there was no one else to investigate. On the other hand, Edith expressed relief and happiness that justice had finally been served. Meanwhile, the twins' mother chose not to speak to the media, while their father expressed his disagreement with the ruling. Victor's lawyer announced plans to seek his immediate release, asserting that they had always maintained his innocence. If the evidence indeed confirmed that Marcos was the only one at the crime scene, his client would be released immediately. Ultimately, on December 5, 2013, the Higher Court of Justice announced the release of Victor due to insufficient evidence to convict him. After his release, Victor sought compensation from the state, requesting $75,000 for his wrongful imprisonment. However, he received no payment. Over time, Marcelina began to reassess her view of the events and ultimately accepted that Victor had not been involved in Johanna's murder. Although the marriage between Edith and Victor lasted several years, by 2021, it was known that they had separated. She was living with a new partner and was expecting her first child, while he had rebuilt his life with another woman. After more than 2 decades of tangled romantic relationships, a brutal crime, and a couple of equally controversial trials, the case of Johanna Casas seemed to have finally reached a conclusion. Nevertheless, to this day, there are still those who debate the facts and continue to question whether Victor was truly innocent of the events of July 16, 2010, or if he managed to escape unpunished from one of Argentina's most sensational crimes. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Good afternoon, dear audience. As you know, here at Unreal True Crime, we release videos every other day. Many of you have reached out, expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel also focused on real-life crime stories called The Crime Storyteller. On the days we don't post videos on Unreal True Crime, we'll upload them there. This means if you're looking for daily doses of the most astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. In the mid-1990s in Spain, 2 young Romani teenagers, Rosa and Marcelino Vega, defied societal expectations by getting married before reaching legal adulthood. For them and their community, navigating life was already a complex affair. The Romani people, officially termed by the European Union, have been part of Europe for nearly a millennium. As it stands, they are Europe's most significant ethnic minority, numbering between 8 and 10 million. Despite their population size, the Romani continue to face severe challenges, from school segregation and forced relocations to being marginalized into ghettos. They also struggle with restricted employment prospects solely based on their heritage and limited access to healthcare and other essential public services. So far, no resolution from the European Union's governing bodies has managed to effectively address these issues. Yet, despite facing all these adversities, Rosa and Marcelino fell in love and chose to build a life together. Adding another layer of uniqueness to their story, especially from a Western perspective, is the fact that they were cousins. Immaculata had a unique dual relationship with Rosa, being both her aunt and mother-in-law, as well as the matriarch to the four other children. In the Romani community from which they hailed, there was a strong focus on keeping unions within the family to preserve their cultural heritage and lineage. Such unions were prioritized over relationships with non-Romani individuals, often referred to as payos. At the tender age of 15, Rosa and Marcelino embarked on the journey of family life. Their first son, Adolfo, arrived swiftly and was marked by his quintessential Romani features, dark skin and jet black hair. His grandmother affectionately dubbed him Diablo Moreno, or a dark-skinned devil. Shortly thereafter, Jonathan was born. Unlike his brother, he had lighter skin, which made him appear more like a payo. His blue eyes were as luminous as sunlight dancing on the sea, and his unruly blonde locks earned him the lifelong nickname Chucky, reminiscent of the messy-haired doll from the notorious 90s horror movie. The young family shared a humble abode with Immaculata, a small two-room wooden house lacking doors, situated in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in Madrid. This settlement was predominantly composed of extended family members who relied on collective support to navigate their persistent financial struggles. The Vega family, Marcelino's lineage, was an established Romani clan. They had transitioned from agricultural labor to scavenging and selling an assortment of inexpensive goods, from garlic to brass, in a bid to make ends meet. Amid this backdrop of hardship, Rosa and Marcelino received news that they were expecting a third child when Jonathan was still an infant. Their joy, however, was tragically short-lived. On the fateful morning of August 7, 1998, Marcelino, then only 19 years old, died tragically. He was riding in the back seat of a car that crashed at a speed of 200 km per hour on a highway near Barcelona, Spain. Shortly after the tragic loss of Marcelino, Rosa gave birth to a daughter whom she named Carmen. Unfortunately, Marcelino was no longer around to hold her in his arms, leaving Rosa as another young Romani mother facing the challenges of raising her children alone. This was the reality for many impoverished Romani families. They neither controlled lucrative antique markets nor were involved in large drug trafficking operations. Along the way, they had also lost the traditional skill of basket weaving, which once provided extra income. Long gone were the days of field work. They had moved to the city to scrape a living from scavenging. Despite these challenges, they aimed to remain united and uphold the traditions that made them feel at home, no matter where they were. Life moved on for Rosa and her children. Fast forward to Saturday, May 27, 2000, past 2 p.m. in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in San Fernando de Henares, Marcelino's birthday was being commemorated. He would have turned 21 that day had he not died in a car accident 2 years prior. As per Romani custom, the birthdays of the deceased are remembered. To mark the occasion, many in the community visited the cemetery to lay flowers and pay their respects. In Romani culture, the life of a departed loved one is celebrated as well as the life that could have been, no matter how short. On that day, children were running around and playing after having finished their meals. The adults were split between various tasks. Some were scavenging for scrap metal to sell, others were resting after lunch, and some had gone to the cemetery for Marcelino's birthday. Among the group of children, all of whom were cousins, was little Jonathan, the middle child of the late Marcelino and Rosa. By that time, he was already 2 years and 8 months old. Jonathan was an energetic and spirited little boy. On that particular day, his 17-year-old Aunt Isabel was looking after him. She took him and a few of his young cousins to a nearby shopping mall called Prica for an outing. They strolled around for a while, enjoying some sweets before opting to capture the moment in a photo booth. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Isabel, upon collecting the booth's photographs, discovered that Jonathan was missing. In a state of alarm, she combed through the Prica Mall, repeatedly entering and exiting, all the while shouting Jonathan's name. Seeing no trace of him, she raced back to their community to rally the family. By the evening, after formally reporting his disappearance to the police, national authorities joined the search efforts, with firefighters getting involved the following morning. Realizing the gravity of the missing child situation, no one took the matter lightly. Even tracking dogs were deployed, but they yielded no clues regarding Jonathan's whereabouts. Officials soon dismissed the idea that Jonathan had simply wandered off and gotten stuck in nearby natural areas or construction debris. Specifically, the under-construction M45 highway, located not far from their settlement, was examined but ruled out as a location where Jonathan might have been. The next day, both print and TV news featured the unsettling story of a Romani child kidnapped in broad daylight from a mall. The news stunned and worried the public, highlighting the urgency and seriousness of the situation. The community and authorities continued their search, hoping for any lead that could bring Jonathan back to his family. In reaction, both Rosa's and Marcelino's families invoked their deep-rooted communal bonds, managing to gather over 200 Romani individuals from various cities like Sevilla, Malaga, Barcelona, Oviedo, and Madrid. Day and night they combed the areas around Madrid. Although financial resources were limited, they created and posted makeshift flyers at gas stations in the vicinity, but all efforts were in vain. As hours turned into days, desperation escalated. Investigators revisited Prica, the scene of Jonathan's disappearance, and reviewed the available security footage, which unfortunately did not offer any insights due to its outdated technology. A woman who claimed to have been at the mall on that fateful Saturday reported seeing a tall, dark man giving a child, who resembled Jonathan, a bag of sweets before leading him to a children's ride. She later saw them at a cafe, where the man had a beer before departing with the child. However, her account could not be verified. The chief investigator assured everyone that they were treating the case as a high priority and even initiated an international alert via Interpol. Accompanying Jonathan's picture, they provided his description: blue eyes, blonde hair, approximately 3.3 feet tall, around 55 pounds, with milk teeth, dressed in a blue one-piece suit. With no stone left unturned, his family blanketed Madrid with posters featuring Jonathan's image and a contact number. Unfortunately, the numerous calls received were not all sincere or helpful. Numerous theories were considered, yet none provided answers. The concept of abduction became increasingly likely both within the family and from a law enforcement standpoint. One avenue explored was a potential clash between different Romani families. Authorities questioned countless individuals, and the regional government representative at the time, Francisco Xavier Anzurtegui, consulted with heads of Romani families in Madrid. All claimed ignorance about the young boy's disappearance, insisting he wasn't in the hands of any clan. Financial motives were also scrutinized. The family revealed they were awaiting a large insurance payment of 25 million pesetas, approximately $139,000, following Marcelino's death, making it conceivable that someone aimed to claim the money. The family was plagued by anomalous phone calls from a hoarse-voiced man, asserting he had Jonathan, yet no demands were made. While police pursued this lead, it yielded no results. Disturbingly, other calls came in featuring the sounds of a child crying, heightening the family's anguish. These calls were later traced back to a psychologically unstable woman who used a doll to simulate the cries. As days passed with no ransom request, the likelihood of a kidnapping for financial reasons waned. After 2 torturous weeks, Jonathan's location remained a mystery. During this period, the non-stop ringing of the household phone escalated their emotional turmoil. Calls came from inquisitive journalists or individuals offering moral support, but no concrete help. Jonathan remained headline news, yet this offered no advantage in finding him. Immaculata, a grandmother of 38, epitomized the challenges faced by the poor Romani community, enduring the heartache of the situation while striving to keep her family's spirits alive in the face of such adversity. Prematurely aged by years of hardship and now further diminished by grief, she nonetheless endeavored to support her niece, Rosa, a young widow with a child missing. Amidst this devastating situation, Rosa attempted to nurse her 15-month-old daughter, Carmen, who was too young to comprehend the tragedy unfolding around her. Rosa was eating poorly and seemed to be withering away from the inside. A report from the newspaper El País depicted their community, Las Castellanas, as a mud-filled hamlet dotted with makeshift dwellings. Home to 50 to 60 families and encircled by emaciated, unresponsive dogs, the settlement presented a bleak picture of life on the margins. In the summer of 2000, Rosa received the insurance settlement for Marcelino's untimely death. Although it brought some financial respite, the 14 million pesetas were less than they initially expected. Committed to finding her missing son, Rosa designated 7 million pesetas as a reward for information that could lead to Jonathan. She spent the remaining money on a van and countless flyers featuring Jonathan's image. Rosa also purchased additional phones to handle potential leads and, accompanied by relatives, began a relentless journey. They traveled throughout Spain and even crossed into France and Portugal in the hopes of locating Jonathan. Regrettably, the search only deepened their sense of loss and despair. At just 21 years old, Rosa pledged to continue the search for her son, even if it meant walking the entire country with only a cane to aid her. As days stretched into months, a grueling 6 months had passed when Rosa's hope for a family reunion was brutally dashed. One evening, while watching television, they heard a breaking news report. A truck driver had stumbled upon skeletal remains not far, about 1.5 kilometers away, from the shopping center where Jonathan had last been seen. Given the closeness, it was feared that the remains could be Jonathan's. The news stunned the tight-knit Romani community and extinguished any lingering hope that the boy would be found alive. Interestingly, the media stated that this particular area had supposedly been scoured in the initial frantic searches for Jonathan. The bones were located near the construction site of Madrid's M45 highway. The truck driver had stopped to assess the site before unloading soil from the construction project. When he saw the small skull, he immediately thought of Jonathan and reported his discovery, even as the soil was being dumped at that location. The police acted swiftly, using heavy machinery to unearth a fractured skull and a few ribs with no obvious marks of violence. Nearby, they discovered children's clothing, a blue overall, a shirt, and a pair of shoes, all faded but intact. Rosa and Jonathan's grandmother identified these garments as the clothes Jonathan was wearing when he disappeared. To the family, it became clear what had tragically occurred. The authorities advised them to wait for conclusive DNA test results for final verification. A week later, the family received confirmation that the discovered remains were indeed Jonathan's. Rosa, his mother, was so overwhelmed by the news that she had to be hospitalized and treated for acute anxiety. The confirmation brought a tragic closure to the long search, leaving the family to grapple with the painful reality of their loss and the need to seek justice for Jonathan. The emotional toll of searching for her son for 6 months culminated in the heartbreaking discovery of his remains. Debate arose about whether the area where the remains were found had been adequately searched earlier. The local security official claimed that this particular stretch had been overlooked because it was beyond the expected radius of where Jonathan might be found. This discrepancy led to differing opinions among the community and authorities. Some thought the remains had been there all along, while others suspected they had been moved recently. A regular forager and the landowner of the area both stated they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Police refrained from speculating how the fragmented skull, lower jaw, and ribs ended up near the construction site. However, the regional governor suggested that the remains might have been brought there by the truck dumping soil for the construction. The family held fast to their belief that Jonathan was criminally taken, asserting that he would never have wandered off by himself. They clarified, however, that they didn't suspect anyone in particular, noting that if they had, they would have enacted their own form of justice in keeping with the Romani code of an eye for an eye. Clarity remained elusive in the case, and forensic analysis of the remains could not ascertain the cause of Jonathan's death. He was laid to rest in a modest white coffin beside his father, in a funeral attended by just over 20 people, all grappling with the unresolved tragedy. Through it all, Rosa was visibly shattered, unable to stop her tears and suffering from multiple collapses. Although the case remains open, police have made no significant progress. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Jonathan's death remain a mystery, lacking both justice and explanation. That is the end of today's story. Thank you for your continued support. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing, giving it a thumbs up, and sharing. Your support enables me to keep creating. See you soon in another Unreal True Crime. Good afternoon, dear audience. As you know, here at Unreal True Crime, we release videos every other day. Many of you have reached out expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel also focused on real-life crime stories called The Crime Storyteller. On the days we don't post videos on Unreal True Crime, we'll upload them there. This means if you're looking for daily doses of the most astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. Erin was born on July 15, 1994, in the United States to unknown parents. Fortunately, she was adopted by Lore and William, a couple from Tennessee. They had 7 children in total, with 5 of them being adopted, including Erin. For Lore and William, adopting was more than a decision. It was about following a divine command to help those in need, especially since some of their adopted children had special needs. For instance, their youngest, Trisha, was born with multiple birth defects. From early childhood, while growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Erin showed a remarkable and unconditional love for animals. Her mother cherished memories of Erin being the only one who could make a rabbit walk on a leash as if it were a dog. Kind-hearted and gentle, Erin enjoyed the benefits of having a loving and united family, facing only the usual challenges of any average household. When Trisha passed away at just 3.5 years old, Lore and William helped their grieving children understand the importance of having provided a happy life for her. Over time, Erin turned her affinity for animals into a special talent for taming horses that no one else could tame. She had a pony named Riley at a stable near her home. In 5th grade, she met Jonathan Corwin, a boy a year older than her. Initially, they were not particularly close, But about 5 years later, they started chatting on social media. By then, Erin's protective nature had led her to become the mother of dozens of animals, ranging from fish and guinea pigs to dogs and cats, all of whom she welcomed and cared for. Eventually, Jonathan plucked up the courage to ask her out, choosing her 16th birthday for the date. With her parents' permission, their love blossomed. Their romance, full of poem exchanges and shared dreams, turned them into the quintessential American couple. After finishing high school, Erin found employment at a local tractor supply company, spending her free time with her horse or scouring garage sales with her mother and siblings. Meanwhile, Jonathan joined the Marine Infantry, and without hesitation about their bright future, they married in Las Vegas in November 2012. The following year, Jonathan learned he would be transferred to California. While the prospect excited both him and Erin, they planned to return to East Tennessee as soon as possible. In September 2013, the newlyweds moved to their new home at the Marine base in San Bernardino County. In turn, the location served as one of the entry points to Joshua Tree National Park. Here, they met new people, such as the couple Connor and Aisling Maliki, who lived with their young son Brian on the ground floor of the same block as Erin and her husband. Amid daily tasks, Jonathan also struck up a friendship with another colleague, Christopher Brandon Lee. Son of Karen Lee and hailing from Anchorage, Alaska, Christopher was a Marine who had been going through tough times after returning from a tour in Afghanistan. He lived on the base with his wife Nicole and their 6-year-old daughter Liberty. Like Erin, the couple shared a love for horses. Soon, the three couples became friends. While their husbands were on duty, Erin, Aisling, and Nicole would visit each other to have lunch and chat. When Jonathan, Connor, and Christopher were at home, they would cook or watch movies and TV shows in any of their apartments. It seemed like each home was everyone's home. Additionally, Christopher and his wife Nicole became horse sponsors at the Roca Blanca Ranch, which also hosted a non-profit organization dedicated to animal care and protection. Isabel Megley owned the site. Naturally, upon learning about it, Erin joined the initiative. Amid their military duties, everything seemed to go smoothly. Initially, Christopher seemed to fit well with the uniform, but over time, other Marines noticed he often displayed a mix of disorder and insolence in handling weapons. An officer later reprimanded him for treating rifles and rocket launchers as if they were toys, earning Christopher a reputation for being reckless. For the Corwins, everyday life, far from their respective families, presented challenges that strained their relationship beyond the honeymoon phase. Their youth also meant they were not fully prepared for the challenges of marriage, often arguing over money and accusing each other of overspending. However, when Erin became pregnant, all disagreements and bitterness between her and Jonathan dissolved. She was so happy with the news that she announced it with a blue and pink post on her social media profile. Unfortunately, just a few weeks later, Erin suffered a miscarriage, which devastated her emotionally. To make matters worse, Jonathan's frequent deployments for military exercises far from the base added physical and emotional distance, as she felt he was unable to console her. Consequently, the cracks in their marriage not only reappeared, but also deepened. During the free time they shared, Christopher had been watching Erin and found it easy to discern the depth of sadness on her face. From that moment, he began spending more time with Erin without Nicole around. On a Sunday night in February 2014, the Lees joined the Corwins in their apartment. Jonathan and Nicole chose to watch a zombie series episode, but Erin, put off by the violence, declined to join. Instead of staying with his wife, Christopher went with Erin to the master bedroom to play video games. Alone, sitting side by side on the floor, they spent a few minutes in front of the screen until one of them paused the game and they looked at each other. Suddenly, they shared their first kiss. Although it lasted only a moment, that intimate gesture changed everything, and they began an affair that quickly escalated in intensity. Soon, Erin and Christopher were talking about leaving their spouses and how great a stepmother she would be to Liberty, whom she frequently cared for. Meanwhile, Nicole sensed her husband's growing distance and soon checked his cell phone, discovering the text messages between Christopher and Erin. Nicole was furious and confronted Christopher with a monologue filled with bitter words that lasted for hours. She didn't stop there, though. She also informed Jonathan about the affair, causing a heated confrontation that lasted through the night. When Erin tried to leave, Nicole, eyes blazing with rage, screamed threats at her. Erin and Christopher ended their affair, but weeks later, they resumed their secret meetings. Around this time, Christopher wrote Erin a poem, urging her not to give up. Meanwhile, unaware of the ongoing betrayal, Jonathan was determined to make his marriage work. Then, on June 22, 2014, as Erin anxiously awaited her mother's first visit to California, she discovered she was pregnant again, this time undoubtedly with Christopher's child. Though she didn't announce it on social media, she told him. Initially, Christopher feigned happiness, but in reality he was displeased, fearing the news could disrupt his plans. Despite promising a future together to Erin, Christopher had no intention of leaving his wife and was greatly fearful of Nicole's potential reaction to the pregnancy. His time in the Marines was nearing its end. On July 4, 2014, he was scheduled to finish his service and then planned to return to Alaska with his wife, leaving behind the tumultuous affair. The next day, Christopher told Isabel that he had been exploring the desert and was thrilled about the interesting things he had found, particularly excited about discovering a hard-to-reach mine shaft. He then asked to borrow a white propane tank that she owned. Isabel had no objections. Meanwhile, he started researching online how to dispose of a body. Then, he messaged Erin to invite her for a surprise romantic evening in the national park. Filled with excitement, Erin immediately texted a friend in Tennessee to share the news. They speculated about the true intentions of her lover and the mention of a surprise element. When her friend sent a text with a ring emoji, Erin admitted she was excited about the possibility of a marriage proposal. The date was set for June 28th. Christopher told his wife he had planned a coyote hunting trip in Joshua Tree National Park with Connor, which conveniently allowed him to take his Winchester .22 caliber rifle. Early that day, he also loaded up the propane tank and gasoline. Before leaving, he mentioned to Nicole that Connor had canceled so he would go alone. Around 7:30 that morning, Erin told Jonathan she was heading to Joshua Tree National Park to explore the trails that she and her mother could later bike on. She kissed him goodbye and said she loved him, leading her husband to believe that their life was returning to normal. Once at the meeting point, Erin faced a harsh disillusionment. Not only was there no dream marriage proposal, but Christopher also made it clear that he had no affection for her whatsoever. She was confronted with a man consumed by anger, with her as the target of his rage. What happened next is largely known only to him, but it is known that he fired shots into the air before using a rope tied to 2 reinforcement bars to strangle Erin, cutting off her air supply. After she fell to the ground, he checked her vital signs and, ensuring she was not breathing, threw her into the mine shaft he had discovered days earlier. Erin fell 76 meters deep. As hours passed with no news from his wife, Jonathan became anxious. He tried calling her at least 50 times and eventually reported her missing the next morning. when the young soldier also contacted his mother-in-law. She suspected that her daughter, who always had trouble with directions, might have gotten lost in the vast national park. Several days passed with no information about Aaron's whereabouts. When new information finally emerged, it was far from reassuring. A woman living in a remote area noticed that a car had been parked near her house for several days, which was very unusual. She took pictures of the car and shared them, hoping the owner would appear. These photos turned out to be crucial, as it was discovered that the car belonged to Aaron. When the police informed Aaron's family that they had found her car abandoned several kilometers north of the park, she felt a stab in her heart. To her, it was almost a certain sign that her daughter had encountered something sinister. The police shared a similar sentiment. From that point, the authorities had two tasks, one more challenging than the other. The first task was to gather evidence to prosecute a potential attacker. In this regard, San Bernardino's detectives began to delve into Aaron's life and soon uncovered hidden aspects that might have endangered her. It was through their investigations that Jonathan learned his wife's affair had continued in secret. This detail quickly led the police to rule out the husband as a suspect. Instead, Christopher became the focus of their investigation, especially after tire tracks found near Aaron's car seemed to match his vehicle. Consequently, on July 1, 2014, Christopher was interviewed by the police. By then, he had hidden his rifle at Isabel's ranch. Christopher initially apologized for not disclosing his relationship with Aaron, claiming their interactions had never crossed the boundaries set by their respective marriages. Then, unexpectedly, he claimed that Aaron had confided in him about being a victim of domestic abuse. Regarding the Saturday she disappeared, he admitted being in the national park area alone, ostensibly to hunt coyotes, hence firing his gun at rocks. However, the police confronted him with the evidence, leading Christopher to change his story. Without a body, the investigators could not pressure him further. At that point, there was no way to prove Aaron was deceased. So after 9 hours, lacking sufficient evidence to charge him, the authorities had to let Christopher go. The police were convinced that the story provided by the main suspect was highly unusual and implausible. Later, when the detectives spoke with Nicole, they noted her uncooperative attitude, almost as if she resented the investigation. Christopher was eventually discharged from the Marine Corps, and as planned, he and his wife packed their bags, loaded their truck, and, along with Little Liberty, headed back to Alaska. Meanwhile, the police's second and more daunting task was to locate Aaron's remains and prove that this was not a mere case of spontaneous disappearance. The investigation seemed to stall, and the detectives were frustrated. Until Isabel remembered that the week before Aaron's disappearance, Christopher had mentioned going to the national park with a friend to explore mines, referencing one that nobody would find. Determined to follow this lead, they sought the help of a local expert, skilled and familiar with the scattered mines across the terrain. Guided by this expert, the investigators and volunteers in California began a meticulous search for Aaron in the park. They covered 3,000 square kilometers of wilderness, with 6 different law enforcement agencies eventually getting involved. However, after several weeks of searching, there were no favorable results, leading to the difficult decision to end the operation on Saturday, August 16, 2014. Yet, in a surprising twist of fate on that day, a spelunker noticed a strong smell of gasoline coming from one of the mines. In the final hours of that day, volunteers lowered a bucket with a camera into the mine. At 9 meters down, the oxygen level in the pit was toxic, and further down, near 30 meters, they discovered what appeared to be a body. After a tremendous effort in the late hours of that Saturday in August, the body was retrieved, 2 months after Aaron's disappearance. A propane tank was also found at the bottom of the mine, believed to be part of a failed attempt to destroy the victim's body. The remains were airlifted to the local morgue, where, due to advanced decomposition, dental records were used for identification. It was confirmed to be Erin, who had died from asphyxiation caused by an object still clutched around her neck. Additionally, it was revealed that she was pregnant. The shocking discovery that Erin and her unborn child had been killed sent her family on an emotional roller coaster. Though it was the worst possible news, for her mother at least, it was more bearable than the ongoing uncertainty of not knowing her whereabouts. For now, her mother only hoped that her daughter's body would be returned to Tennessee for a proper burial. With Christopher having the motive, means, and opportunity and evidence piling up against him, he was soon arrested by a police officer in Anchorage, and his vehicle was confiscated. Inside the car, beneath the passenger seat, authorities found a homemade object similar to the one found around Erin's neck. This led the police to interview Christopher's mother. Although she knew nothing about the item and claimed never to have seen it, a search of her home later uncovered a magazine edition featuring an article on Erin's case. Following Christopher's arrest, the case attracted national media attention. Shortly after, the San Bernardino's police held a press conference to provide details on the case. They mentioned that Christopher was the main suspect in the crime. They also searched Isabel's ranch to her utter astonishment, where they found and seized a rifle owned by Christopher. Further complicating his situation, investigators discovered incriminating search histories on his internet activity. Consequently, Christopher was charged with first-degree murder. On Friday, September 19, 2014, hundreds of candles flickered in silent memory and tribute to Erin and the unborn child whose life was cut short. Approximately 250 people attended the vigil, many wearing special T-shirts with Erin's name on the front and a Bible verse on the back. During this time, Jonathan agreed to speak with only one media outlet among the many seeking his comment. In an interview, he expressed his hatred for Christopher's actions, but stated he felt that harboring hatred every time he saw him would eventually consume him. Jonathan revealed that he had learned about the rekindled affair and that his wife disappeared when she went to see Christopher, who was still his next-door neighbor. Part of him wanted to confront Christopher violently, but he refrained, believing it would make him no better than Christopher. Jonathan did not want to be a bad person. The legal process for obtaining justice for Erin Corwin began 2 years later in October 2016. From the outset of the trial against Christopher, the prosecution easily established his penchant for violence and his motive and opportunity to commit the crime. On Wednesday, October 19th, a forensic scientist testified that a .22 caliber bullet casing was found near the mine where Erin's body was discovered, and the firing pin marks on the casing matched Christopher's gun. When it was the defense's turn, Christopher was presented as the sole witness. He took the stand and, despite confirming all evidence against him, confessed to killing Erin. However, he then offered a narrative of the events that was clearly not only false but also desperate. He claimed he had suspected that Erin had abused his daughter while caring for her, leading to a so-called revelation on that fateful Saturday in the desert. In light of his narrative, Christopher believed he had ample justification for his actions, clearly hoping that his macabre story would result in a lesser sentence. Throughout the trial, he maintained a demeanor of cooperation and calmness. However, the jury did not believe a single word of his account. After just 15 minutes of deliberation, Christopher Brandon Lee was found guilty of first-degree murder. The following month, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In response to the tragedy, Aaron's family and some civic groups advocated for a petition to the Bureau of Land Management, urging them to provide funding and resources to seal abandoned vertical mine shafts, starting with the one where Aaron Corwin perished. Recognizing the enormity of the task and acknowledging that some public areas had already been closed, they requested prioritization for this particular area to prevent similar tragedies from affecting other families. Reflecting on the entire ordeal and the relief of reaching a conclusive verdict, Aaron's mother admitted feeling emotionally and physically drained by the end of the sentencing hearing. She had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for over 2 years, with her grief so heavy that she could barely walk. Yet, following the verdict and sentencing, she felt an immense burden lifted off her shoulders, likening her emotional response to the day she finally adopted Aaron. She described years of uncertainty in the adoption process and how all the stress vanished the moment she gave Aaron her last name, mirroring her relief upon hearing Christopher's sentence. As for Jonathan Corwin, Aaron's husband, he chose to shield himself from media overexposure and was taking steps to rebuild his life after the tragic loss. With that, we conclude today's story. Remember to subscribe and like if you appreciate this work. Good night, and see you in the next episode of Unreal True Crime.